of all, thank you, Professor Datta, for allowing me to present my research findings on the middle income trap and medium development trap problems. I try to move it, but it doesn't want to move. What should I do?
You can click on your next slide.
Okay. All right. Is it, do you see it now?
Yes,
right.
We can.
So researchers have been working on measuring development achievements of different countries for a while. And of course, the big question is, how can we measure development? Especially, how can we measure development gap between the highly developed and the less developed nations? The typical indicator which is used is GDP or GDP per capita growth. And the research findings concluded that in case the GDP per capita growth slows down or stagnate, it would show that the country falls into a so-called middle development or middle income trap. Now, the problem is that measuring development by a growth-related indicator is probably doesn't tell us the real story, because basically GDP per capita is about growth and it is not about development. And the other problem is that global companies typically locate their assembly operations into the less developed countries to tap into the cheap labor pool. And when they produce considerable amount of profit, probably they repatriate it, which means that the repatriated profit, which is an ingredient, an element. What is this voice? Okay. Can you hear me? Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yes, you continue. We can hear you.
I heard a different presentation. So let me repeat this sentence. So the repatriated profit is an element of GDP, but it cannot be used for development locally because it leaves the host country. So this is the reason why measuring development by using GDP per capita indicators is not helpful, it's not useful for analyzing development gaps between the more developed and the less developed nations. So therefore, I think a paradigm shift is needed. Instead of analyzing middle income trap, we have to analyze the development indicators of the different countries to understand the real development status of the country. Now, what are the typical development indicators? There are many of them. I would suggest a few, like economic structure, human development indicators, and of course, the objective has to be to improve the value of these development indicators. Now, a very important element we have to consider is the so-called smiling curve, which shows that the assembly and processing part of the entire production process creates the so-called low wages jobs, which are only efficient and enough for satisfying basic needs of the employed people. And if the high value added part of the smiley curve is also present in a country, then it offers an opportunity for creativity, problem solving, as we see it on the Maslow hierarchy. But the problem is that basically global companies locate the assembly and processing part of the curve into the less developed nations. Now let me show you a few typical development-related indicators. One of those is the number of enterprises which are innovative, which can be considered companies producing new value, innovation, high value added. This is an indicator of development. You see a few countries compared here, and you see the so-called V4 countries, Slovakia, Hungary, Poland, and Romania, and you see that this indicator is very low for these countries. Or you can also check and analyze the import content of exports. If the import content is very high, it means that actually the typical operation is assembly, everything is imported, everything is assembled locally, then the final product is exported. But this means a low value added activity. About human development indicators, of course, the most important one is life expectancy. And again, you see that the so-called V4 countries are at the very, very low end of this graph. Another important indicator is the so-called deaths from treatable and preventable diseases in the person's age less than 75 years category. If you see again the four countries which I tried to compare for you, you see that the highest number per 100,000 inhabitants can be found in these four countries, which means that these actually indicate a problem with the healthcare system, which is of course again a development, human development indicator. Also the knowledge level, skills level is another important human development indicator. You see here the population with tertiary education. Again, what we see in these four V4 countries, that this number is very low in both categories, both age groups I am showing to you. And if you see the other end, we have Denmark, Sweden with very, very high proportion of people with tertiary education. Another important human quality indicator is the so-called adult participation in learning or lifelong learning. Again, we have very poor indicator values for the less developed countries within the European Union. And finally, another important human quality indicator is the so-called talent ranking, which is calculated by the International Management Development Center in Lausanne. And this is a composite indicator characterizing the quality of the human knowledge pool in any country, and also that how much the countries invest in the human capital. And as you see, there is a huge gap here between the highly developed countries I'm showing to you and the so-called less developed countries in Eastern Europe. And finally, an environmental indicator, which is about the exposure to air pollution. And this is, of course, related to the nature of activities which are present in the different countries. Of course, the assembly type of operations are more polluting than the knowledge-oriented, innovation-oriented activities. So what I tried to summarize for you, it is that we have to be cautious when we try to draw conclusion on development situation of the different countries. I am absolutely sure, and all the knowledge indicators prove this, that measuring development by using macro data, basically data related to economic growth, would not be sufficient for understanding real development. GDP numbers are misleading, do not indicate real development, and may push countries to unsustainable growth paths. Therefore, development would be more important. Of course, we have to find the right types of development indicators. I just showed you a few. There are more, much more. But development has to describe the situation of the individuals and the society as well, the values we add to our population and our society, like to the trust level in a society. Development has to be long-term, future-oriented, while growth is basically past-based and short-term oriented. You also have to consider climate change, circular economy issues, which all require long-term development orientation. In another word, a new mindset. Therefore, research on avoiding the development trap can be more useful for decision makers interested in finding sustainable green development paths instead of a growth maximizing path. So this is especially important for the less developed countries in order to catch up with the highly developed advanced countries. And I think we have to choose between the two. And if asked me, I would choose the sustainable progress development path. Thank you very much for your attention.